Hi YouTube, welcome to another edition of Horror Hands, and this is going to be my video for the next top 20 list that's going around. So this was created by Joe the Horror Man and Jason from Horrific Nightmares, and the theme of this list is the top 20 vampire movies. So there was a couple of conditions for this one. As usual, you can only have one film per franchise. So your list can't be made up of like part 1, part 2, part 3, for example. And the other condition is, if I understand this right, you can only have one portrayal of Dracula. So whether that's Bela Lugosi, Christopher Lee, Frank Langella, you can only have one Dracula movie on the list. And also, just a condition for me, I'm only going to include movies that I own. So it was a difficult list to do. When I first saw the theme, I thought, I'm not sure if I own 20 vampire films, but then went through the collection and found that there's loads of great vampire movies out there, so I had to leave some really good films off the list, but hopefully you enjoy the list. So at number 20 is the most modern film on the list, and that is Bliss. And this is a really excellent film. Very unique take on the vampire story. There's a few unique takes on vampires in this list, but this one is really out there. And it's the story of a young woman. She's kind of a bit at rock bottom, and she's out sort of partying a bit too much, and she drinks something or she takes something that gives her a real kind of bloodlust. And the people around her become victims as she kills them to feed on their blood. And it's a difficult movie in one sense to watch because it's very trippy, almost hallucinogenic in places, but a really well-made film. And when you really get down to the crux of the story and sort of by the second half of the film, it's really, really well-made and has some really good gory moments in it too. So number 20 is Bliss. Number 19 is Stateland. I watched this when it first came out and really enjoyed it. Thought it was a very kind of fresh and original take on vampires. I like the kind of apocalyptic feel to it. I have watched it again since. Didn't enjoy it as much. Found it a little bit downbeat, but still really enjoyed it and thought it was a really well made film, and it's definitely good enough to make this list. So 19 is Stateland. 18 we have Thirst, which is a Korean film, I think, about like a priest, a man of the church, who has a blood transfusion, and he gets a bloodlust as a result of that, so kind of similar to Bliss, but dealt with a bit differently. So again, the people around him start falling victim to him, and it has a really sort of crazy, twisty-turny storyline and a really good ending as well. Highly recommend Thirst if you've not seen that one. So, number 18 is Thirst. 17, this is a double feature with Countess Dracula and the Vampire Lovers. Both great films, but for this, I'm going to say Countess Dracula. So this is Ingrid Pitt. She plays, I think, like the Carmilla character, where she discovers that if she kills young women and bathes in their blood, it keeps her looking beautiful. So she has to do that throughout the film. If she doesn't, she starts to look aged and starts to look a bit withered and haggard, so she has to keep killing people and bathing in their blood to effectively to stay looking like Ingrid Pitt. But really good film. I've always enjoyed this one, and I like the kind of the alternative take on Dracula with a woman playing the role. So number 17, Countess Dracula. Number 16 we have Vamp. Grace Jones playing a vampire in this nightclub. A really fun film, very, very 80s movie. It's got a bit of a Fright Night vibe to it, one that I've really enjoyed. I'm not the biggest fan of Grace Jones, but to give her credit, she is really, really good in this, and it's a great portrayal of a vampire. And as I say, just a real kind of fun, tongue-in-cheek type film. So number 16 is Vamp. Right, number 15 is The House That Dripped Blood. Now this is an anthology film. It's not entirely about vampires, but there is a segment in it which is about vampires, and it's fantastic. And it's Jon Pertwee playing a horror star. They're making a movie within a movie. And he's really kind of sort of a disgruntled actor. He doesn't particularly like horror films or where the genres going, and there's a few sort of self-referencing remarks to Hammer and Amicus and things like that. But he, as part of the movie they're making, he gets like a cape which I believe belonged to a real vampire, and then it turns out one of his co-stars is a real vampire and things like that, and it all gets a bit crazy, but it's a really, really good segment. Overall, it's a fantastic film, and that segment is very memorable, so I certainly wanted to include that on the list. So, number 15, House That Dripped Blood. Number 14, I wasn't too sure whether to put this movie on the list, because it is very different, but I do think it deserves its place on the list. And that is Life Force. So these are like space vampires, so they don't sort of bite you on the neck and drink your blood. They feast on your actual life force, so they attack you and they sort of leave you as a shriveled up kind of corpse. Really cool film. I only watched this for the first time a few months ago and really, really enjoyed it. It's a great mix of sci-fi horror. And one that I thought was a very well made film. So definitely, despite it being very different, definitely deserves its place on the list. So at number 14 is Life Force. Number 13 is 30 Days a Night. So a really excellent movie about a small town in Alaska who actually they go without 30 days of sunlight. It's dark the whole time, and as a result of that they're attacked by vampires and have to fend them off for this 30 days. And I always thought this was a really cool movie, a great story, great plot, and as I understand there are actually places in the world that do go sort of for a long time without sunlight. So I was surprised that nobody had ever picked this up until this movie came out, but glad someone did, and the result is a really, really excellent movie. So number 13 is 30 Days a Night. Right, number 12 is Count Yorga, Vampire. And I was actually having a conversation about this the other day with Horror Dad, and we were both agreeing that it's a very underrated movie. It feels a bit like a Hammer film, but at the same time it's its own film. And Robert Quarry is absolutely fantastic as Count Yorga. So if you're into your old-fashioned like Hammer horror type movies, definitely check this one out. It's a really good film. So number 12 is Count Yorga, Vampire. Number 11 is John Carpenter's Vampires. This is a really cool film. I love James Woods in this. Such a cool character in it. Probably would have been a bit higher on the list. It's just I've not seen this movie for so long. So the good things about it I can only just remember. But I definitely wanted to put it on the list. So number 11 is John Carpenter's Vampires. So going into the top 10. And at number 10 we have Shadow of the Vampire. This is a really interesting story, and it tells the tale of the movie Nosferatu. It tells the story of them making that movie, but the guy who plays the vampire is actually a vampire. So they cast him, but he is actually a vampire for real, and it tells the story of, I guess, what that would be like, the complications that you would have in casting a real life vampire. And it's a really, really wonderful film. Some great sets in it, great performances. Willem Dafoe is fantastic as the Max Schreck Nosferatu character. But for me, John Malkovich as the slightly unhinged film director really steals the show. It's a really excellent movie. Highly recommend Shadow of the Vampire if you've not seen it. And that is number 10. At number 9 is Daybreakers, and this is a film that I put off watching for years and years. I saw the trailer and I just didn't really like the look of the sort of sleekness and the high-techness of it. Didn't quite think that would make a good vampire film, but having watched it, I really, really enjoyed it. I think it's an excellent film, and I love the idea that vampires have taken over the population, but with that comes problems of things like a shortage of blood and things like that. Really, really interesting concept and great performances by everyone that's involved. Some really good action scenes, and yeah, a movie that I'm really glad I finally decided to check out, because it's a really excellent film. So number 9 is Daybreakers. So number 8, we have the original Nosferatu from the 20s. The movie that blatantly rips off Dracula, but nonetheless is a classic in itself, and it has some really wonderful moments in it. This film, it's both beautiful and elegant, yet really creepy and sinister at the same time. So things like the shadow of the vampire going up the staircase, and the shadow of his hand over the woman's chest, and things like that. Really, really wonderful film, and movies from this time with that sort of tanged black and white look, just to me, are automatically creepy. So yeah, a timeless classic, and one that I think should certainly be on the list. So number 8, Nosferatu. And I don't consider Nosferatu and Shadow of the Vampire to be of the same franchise. Number 7 is Blade 2. And I had to debate whether or not to put Blade 1 or 2 on the list. I think they're both pretty much equally great movies. But I really like the story in Blade 2, where the warring factions have to come together to fight a bigger evil. I thought that was really, really awesome. And I love kind of the action scenes and things like that in both Blade movies, and the choreography and things like that are absolutely amazing. So a film that I've always found highly entertaining. So number 7, Blade 2. Number 6 is From Dusk Till Dawn. Such an awesome film. I wish I could go back and watch this film without knowing what it's about, because the twist in this film is just unbelievable. And it is a great movie in both parts. It's a great sort of road movie / crime film, and then it's an excellent sort of vampire and crazy creature feature film at the same time. And the way it just shifts is, I've never seen another film do it like that. Just be one film and then become another one, and still be a great film. So it's one that I've always loved. I've always appreciated it for kind of turning the tables the way it does, and just being a really good film in both kind of genres that it sort of exists in. Yeah, I love From Dusk Till Dawn. So number 6 is From Dusk Till Dawn. So into the top 5, and number 5 is Salem's Lot, which is a film that gets a lot of recognition, but I still think it's rather underrated. In terms of sort of Tobe Hooper's work, it sort of sits in between Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Poltergeist, which seem to be his biggest movies. But for me, Salem's Lot is such a well-made film. 3 hours of just excellence. The book is fantastic, and this adaptation for me is one of the best. I don't think it's aged too well, but saying that, I like that sort of real 70s feel to it. I love the look of the vampire in it, the sort of the bald-headed, blue-skinned vampire. David Soul and everyone else in it did a wonderful job, and yeah, I just think it's a really good kind of low-key horror film, if you will. One that I've always really enjoyed. So number 5 is Salem's Lot. Number 4 is Near Dark. And again, I've always enjoyed this one for the kind of different kind of take on it. So they're vampires, but they don't kind of live in the shadows in castles and coffins. They're out in the Midwest, driving around in the day in like that covered RV and things like that. And this has some great characters in it as well. Lance Henriksen and Bill Paxton do a fantastic job. I like the story of Adrian Pastor's character meeting the vampire woman and kind of falling for her, but getting involved in this kind of vampire family, and the film sort of exploring their lifestyle and how they managed to get around and things like that. Just a really, really excellent movie, one that I've always enjoyed. So number 4 is Near Dark. Number 3 is my Dracula choice, and it's Horror of Dracula. So Hammer Horror's first Dracula film with Christopher Lee. Christopher Lee for me is my favourite portrayal of Dracula. I love everything about this movie, the settings, the sort of the rich colours, the music. For me, it's very iconic. It's a very quintessential Dracula movie, and was always going to be my Dracula choice on this list. So number 3 is The Horror of Dracula. Number 2 is The Lost Boys. And this is a film I originally found this as a little kid on VHS in my mum and dad's house, and it had quite a bland cover. It just had The Lost Boys, and I kind of dismissed it as like a boring drama about children that go missing or something, and then turned the video over and it had a picture of Kiefer Sutherland like vamping out, and I thought, oh, now I think I'm going to check this out. And ever since then it's been one of my all-time favourite horror movies. Possibly the coolest horror film ever made. I don't know, that's up for debate. And just excellent characters, a whole load of amazing, somewhat forgotten, but amazing 80s talent in this movie. And just love everything about it. Just like I say, one of the coolest horror movies ever made. So number 2 is The Lost Boys. Which brings us to number 1, my all-time favourite vampire movie ever made, and that is Fright Night. And this has been one of my favourite movies anyway since I was a little kid. I love everything about it. I love the way that kind of the horror genre is represented in this film. I think director Tom Holland really nails it in terms of sort of what we like about horror and being a horror fan in terms of the character watching Peter Vincent and things like that. I love the music. It's got some of my favourite music of any film in it. And for me, Chris Sarandon in this movie is perhaps the greatest portrayal of a vampire ever. I just love his suaveness and his charm and things like that. He just did an amazing job. For me, it's pretty much a perfect horror movie. I absolutely love it, and that is my number 1 choice of favourite vampire movies. So I hope you like that list. Let me know what you think. Do you agree? Do you not agree? Looking forward to checking out everybody else's. So thank you for watching that, and stay tuned for more videos.